Okay, I guess we're just about ready to get going. I think I finally have all the nuts and bolts here ready to go. And I first want to say Shana Tovat, everybody. And I know we would probably have more people here, but some people said they couldn't come because they're going to temple today on the second day. So we'll we'll it'll be recorded, so they'll have access to the recording if they so desire. Anyhow, I thought I would take a few seconds and introduce Art and tell you a little bit about actually my relationship with Art. I met Art in Alameda, where he attended the weekly adult education program that I ran at Temple Israel. He was also active. He was also active in the weekly sessions that we had there with the adult education program ran every single week. So it wasn't like once a month. We were doing this on a weekly basis. Also, as Art is also part of the book group that many of us from the temple participate in. And in fact, he is still active in that group, pushing us towards nonfiction versus fiction books. There's also a Zoom group that meets on a weekly basis that Art is active in, and I and others who have moved out of Alameda are still very active. A very good friend of mine also joins us on a weekly basis from Arizona and occasionally one from Philadelphia. So a little bit more about Art. Arthur Shostak spent 42 wonderful years, 1961 to 2003, as an applied sociologist, professional futurist, labor educator, and a public speaker before retiring in 2003 at the age of 66 to augment travel that he has since taken him and Lynn Singh, his wife, for over 3 decades to 35 countries. His special interest is learning and sharing that learning, so he has written, edited, or co-edited 34 books. Art and Lynn lived in Oakmont from 2012 to 2016 and have since enjoyed living in Alameda. They have 4 sons, 6 grandchildren, almost all living nearby. And without any further ado, here is Art.
That's it.
Great.
Thank you. Let me begin by thanking you for taking the time and making the effort to join in the discussion of a very controversial matter. Okay. I'm here to make a case, somewhat like a lawyer, make a case for what I regard as an overdue, vital redesign of the mainstream Holocaust, Shoah. I note I use both names. I'll explain that in a moment. Holocaust Shoah narrative. My reading of the narrative is what you see, and I'm going to indicate at the outset that you are a literate adult audience. I never read slides to people who are literate. Okay, I've never understood that practice and I won't indulge in it. So we'll take a moment for you to exercise that remarkable talent you have to read what I put in front of you. What I will emphasize is the closing sentence. And by the way, I'll send any of you the slides at your request, at your invitation. So you needn't copy them down specifically, but you'll note the last sentence. And the last sentence says, your support is the measure of the time we're going to spend together, the brief time we're going to spend together this Sunday afternoon. Namely, can I persuade you to join me and a guest that you're going to hear later, a local activist sitting right over here on my left, who will say a few words to you about local activities already aligned, ALAIGNED, aligned with this call for a reset. Okay, so that enables us to move to the second slide, which is called Dynamic Judaism. It's such a beautiful day outside that I really intended to start off on a bright note, this note. We are living, fortunately, in an epoch of remarkable advances in Judaism, okay? The first one, Haggadah. All of you will recognize the word Manischewitz, because all of us grew up as children with the purple Manischewitz Haggadah year after year after boring year. Okay, good news. If you go to the internet, you will find a dazzling array of Haggadahs of every type to suit your intellectual, your emotional, and your spiritual needs. That's something to welcome.
I wanted to add, Art, the Haggadah in haiku.
Oh, haiku.
Available on Amazon.
Oh, on Amazon. I'm going to add it to the slide. Okay. You will note also that we have taken an entire holiday like Purim with Ahasuerus and his niece, and is placing his niece available to the king. Feminists have come forward and have said, enough with that sexist approach. Let's regard the niece not as a harlot placed at the king's whim, but let's regard her as an agent who's defending the lives of the Jewish community and keeping Haman from hanging everybody, which was his design. And he had influence with the king. In short, there's an entire holiday that's been reformulated by feminists on behalf of us all. Okay, we now have over 2,000, and the number's growing because in the seminaries, as I talk, the plurality of students in rabbinical seminaries are female. When you and I were children, that was a distant fantasy, a distant, impossible dream. And it's a reality today. My synagogue, Temple Israel of Alameda, has a remarkable woman rabbi, okay? And you've known women rabbis yourselves, okay? We now have item number 4. Are you familiar with the name Pinchas? Okay, later today, go into the internet. You can type in Pinchas Interactive TV, and a still fortunately alive in his late 90s, elderly Jewish survivor will come on the screen and will be addressing an audience commonly of young people, and the young people will be able to ask this hologram, this 3D hologram, anything they want answered about his experience as a camp survivor. We now have 35 or more of these holograms available at a cost of production which is astronomical. It does, though, address the issue that by 2025 or 6, the last direct survivor will have passed. Okay, and so the holograms now come in to support them. Okay, I mentioned number 5. This is an example of existing academic groups around the world that take the Holocaust as the center of their existence. Here, for example, is the leading journal of its type, Holocaust and Genocide Studies. This is a current issue. It is in tiny print, filled with new information, new findings, new interpretations. Okay, the Holocaust is the most studied genocide in human history. Okay. That said, this issue sheds new light on it every time the publication comes out. So you understand this is a dynamic subject, Okay. The next slide, please. If we can get it. Yes, okay. I think it's fair for you to have a better brief understanding of who you're listening to. You know, if the subject is one that has kept attendance here today down, okay, it's because the Holocaust is the third rail of American Jewish thought. Touch the subject and you risk getting burned. Okay? In a polite group of American Jews, in a casual setting, if there's a lull in conversation and you say, we haven't talked about the Holocaust recently, you get my friend's reaction at best. Commonly, you'll get someone saying, football season's just begun, you know.
49ers to play.
Yeah. So this subject has you hearing someone who I consider an emotional survivor. We have direct survivors, we have emotional survivors, and we have, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want anything to do with the subject. So a word then on the background of the speaker. Somewhat like you, I happen to have 86 years, which may be more than most of you. I have memories of the Second World War, which none of my college students had ever imagined. As a child, in the New York Daily News, tabloid, some of you will recognize, the front page black and white photo was the coastline with smoke rising at the edge of the coastline because U-boats after 41 were sinking freighters of ours that were attempting to help arm the United Kingdom and keep it solvent against the German onslaught. As a child, I saw that. My father was an air raid warden. When the sirens went off on the school across the street from our grocery store, he ran out to guide traffic because the German bombers were expected over Brooklyn, New York. Okay? And we also had the draft, and young men, mostly at that time, maybe only men, would leave the neighborhood. And some months later, in the window, there would be a gold star. So that set me up for the post-1945-46 arrival in the neighborhood of emaciated, almost all men, emaciated men who were scarred emotionally and physically by internment. They were the survivors. And on their arm, they bore the code. Some of you think that the tattoo was random. It was not. The first alphabet letters of the tattoo indicated political prisoner, indicated communist prisoner, indicated gay prisoner. And the German guards responded by temperament with total freedom to how they felt about communist, gay, political, that kind of thing. So I wandered in a local swimming pool in Brownsville, New York, Betsy Head swimming pool with these people. I also read The Wall. I read all the standard novels. And that led me, after 40 some odd, 40, lost 46 or more years of teaching in retirement, to reinvent myself as a Holocaust scholar. And that's who's talking to you now. That meant that with my wife, Lynn Sang, we set out to visit Holocaust camp, memorial sites, and museums around the world, okay, including North Africa, which is commonly ignored, okay? So we've been in Australia and New Zealand. We've been all over Europe, of course, okay? And I have been invested as a reader in memoirs. As I talk to you today, I have a list of in excess of, now it's probably 235 memoirs. And I tell you that as a genre of literature, Holocaust memoirs are superior. They are awesome. Cannot urge you enough to invest time and energy in memoirs, okay? And so I got a big library. That's enough of that. Next slide, please. Okay. The core subject today is the subject of what euphemistically is known as human nature. Okay. I want to suggest to you that a wonderful guide is Charles Darwin. You're all familiar with Darwin, okay, survival of a species. Do you understand that Darwin urges us to think about two different tribes close to one another, but radically different? One of the tribes, the hunters go out, they have success, they have setbacks, they come back to the tribal spot and they give the meat to the wives of the most successful hunters, and they have nothing for the new widows of those who had fallen in the hunt. The other tribe has the reverse policy. The other tribe, when the meat is brought back from the hunt, shares the meat according to the number of children dependents on the part of each of the women who were back there at the site while the men are out doing the hunting. So the second tribe practices what Charles Darwin called the social impulse. Darwin argued that any of you walking here in Oakmont, any of you walking at night, were you to pass an alleyway of sorts and to hear sounds of distress coming from down the alleyway, you are DNA wired to respond. Your impulse is to say, my God, somebody's hurt. I must, M-U-S-T, I must help. Darwin argued that it's not what his name is associated with, I hold up a Rorschach ink blot that says Darwin, and you say survival of the fittest. Wrong. He had nothing to do with those words. He wrote survival of the kindest. Charles Darwin, social impulse, survival of the kindest. Okay. And that brings us to the notion that in over 40,000 Nazi sites, sites, over 40,000 Nazi sites in 24 countries between 41 and 45, there was a Jewish underground. This could have been the first time you've heard that in a discussion of the Holocaust, because the Holocaust commonly dwells on the story of what perpetrators did to victims. I'm here this afternoon to help you get your arms around the story of what victims did for one another, because they did a lot for one another. The Jewish underground in 40,000 sites resisted dehumanization. Resisted dehumanization. See, again, I go back to my metaphor of the Rorschach ink blot. I hold up the word Holocaust, and the common American Jewish person shudders, because they have only been exposed to the story of pain, of atrocity, of crimes against humanity. That's the fancy language we invented after the war. Crimes against humanity, okay? I'm holding up the ink blot today, and notice this time it doesn't say Holocaust. This time it says Holocaust/Shoah. Shoah is the Hebrew word for catastrophe. The Holocaust is the Greek term for burnt sacrifice. Holocaust is a misnomer. It's not a fair label for the loss of 6 million Jews, at least 5 million Gentiles, and inside the figure of 6 million, 1.3 million under the age of 16. Okay, so for a phenomena of that enormity, we need a new mindset. We need a new snap of fingers reaction, one that says, wow, the speaker maintains that every camp had an, do you know what the underground would do? All of you understand the word Canada, and you spell it with C. In the camps, it's spelled with K. Why do they change the word to a K? Because in the camps, the minds of the victims associated plentifulness with the country they heard of, none of them had ever been to, called Canada. Canada had everything. Where in the camps was there a place that had everything? Answer: the warehouse. What did the warehouse contain? All the luggage brought in on the incoming trains by all the several million people sent to the 6 death camps and to the scores of labor camps where they worked people to their death, okay? The luggage had been filled by people who were lied to by the Third Reich, who were told, please pack because we're sending you to workplaces in the East where you'll live out the war under our protection. You'll be fine. Everything will be good. So pack good stuff, which they did. Okay. In the warehouses of Canada, okay, Jewish victims were busy all day sorting into large barrels furs, porcelain, silverware, fine women's clothing, all that stuff, which was then commonly shipped back to Germany, where Nazi Party enthusiasts were rewarded with these Jewish goods. Back to the Jewish underground. Most of the guys and gals, most of the guys sorting the stuff in the warehouse were underground members. They would collected the best wristwatches, and with them they bribed the Nazi guards that regularly protected warehouse from the barracks where the men lived. The bribed guards let the warehouse workers bring back into the camp medicine, food, gloves, scarves. Okay. Had you heard that before about the Holocaust? No, you haven't. No, you haven't. I counted this morning the number of Yom HaShoah Day commemorations that I've been going to in my 86 years. And I think the number is something like 63 or something. I started as a child. And I cannot recall a single Yom HaShoah service with a speaker focused on the, watch this word, on the nobility of people who at risk of life undertook to help less fortunate others. You're familiar with the alphabet, runs from A to Z. The number of acts of what I call stealth meaning hidden, stealth altruism runs from A to Z. In the camps, for example, you did not have a name. You had a number. You had a number, not a name. On the loudspeaker, you listened very carefully because your number dictated your life, basically. In the camps, people whispered one another's name to one another. If you're living under the tyranny of an imposed number and somebody whispers your name, it's a big deal. Positive, okay? In the camps, every tub on its own bottom. And so I want to show you the front cover of my book, okay? What do you see happening on the front cover of this book? You see an ailing prisoner getting help, okay? That's all you see, which isn't enough, because you must appreciate that shortly after this photo got developed, the SS went out and they found both the ailing man and the two holding him up and took them off for summary execution. Because what you're watching is the breaking of a law. The law under the Nazis is that the Untermenschen, your German is good, you understand? Untermenschen, outside of humanity, below humanity. The Untermenschen cannot demonstrate morality. This is a picture of care. Germans were furious because German ideology was clear. 1 ounce of Jewish blood in your veins, by definition, Untermenschen, and available for summary execution. Okay. Altruism then has two themes, and you'll note the footnote at the bottom to Viktor Frankl. Okay, Man in Search of Meaning is one of the great Holocaust books ever written. And it belongs with a circulation much greater than the Anne Frank, secured away in the Dutch apartment. Before I go on, I tend to, as you already noticed, wander a little. So let me wander one more moment. Anne Frank. Okay, all of you know her through the book that is read in high schools everywhere. Here's what you don't know. She and her sister helped care for hidden children in the camp at which they both of them wound up dying of typhus. But before they died, they came at night, avoiding the searchlights, and they reached a particular barrack, which was called a safe barrack, commonly way in the back of all the barracks. And in that safe barrack, there were children who had been secreted into the camp in backpacks and other ways. And Anne Frank and her sister were very loved for that act of stealth altruism. So add that to that index card of yours that reads Anne Frank. Okay. I call the people that I wrote about in this book. The royalties, by the way, for the book go to the Children's Museum in Israel. Did you just hear that? Children's Museum. There is in Israel a remarkable building in which every different alcove has taken and decriminalized or defanged, that's the word I want, defanged the Holocaust, so that that Children's Museum, to which the royalties go from this book, okay, has an audience of scores and scores of school children all the time. 16 American Holocaust museums, as we meet here today, will not permit a child under 13 into the building. And in Israel, Children's Museum explicitly addressing the issue, which is a critical issue, of how do we bring along generations with the legacy that as Jews is ours. The legacy, I'll put it differently. All of you in the room, if I say never forgive, you're inclined to agree. We can argue about that. Okay. Never forget, everybody raises their hand. Oh, yes, I understand that. Sure, never forget. Then I have the chutzpah to quietly say, what? What is it you never want to forget? And the answer comes back in a whisper, the horror. And I'm struggling here to make the point that there are, in fact, two stories, always two stories. The people that I call carers, okay, understood that one of the great contributions of our religious faith, footnote, our religious faith is the only one that has sanctified remembrance. The only one that has sanctified remembrance, okay? Our religious faith is also insistent that doing for others is not optional, is not trivial, is not incidental. It is, in fact, the reward of life. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Is there another one? Yes. We're getting to it. Oh, good. Okay. These are the people who are my heroes and heroines. I know men and women, some in this hall, I expect right now today, who have sports heroes, who have, contest game heroes. My heroes commonly are carers. They did not walk around with puffed chests. They did not boast of their heroism. They did what came naturally. Okay. This last example, I'd like you to read to yourselves for a moment while I catch my breath. I want to give you another example or two. My book opens with a 13-year-old who is standing with other stark naked 12 and 13-year-old girls. They're all in a line. They're in the camp, of course. They're out of a ghetto where they've been starved near to death. They're all in a line. And they're in a line because there is an SS officer who is going to look at each of them and then gesture left or right. Right means slave labor, where we will work you to your death. Left means tomorrow the gas. Not much of a choice, okay? She was approached, this 13-year-old, by a young lady who was a Jewish prisoner who was in the service of this SS officer. And the young lady leaned over the young woman and asked quietly, "How old?" And the emaciated girl said, 13. And the young lady said, 15. The SS officer, on hearing 15 when the girl got up, wasn't impressed because the girl was so emaciated. He signaled to the gas. With this, the Jewish female aide to the officer dared to get to her feet and said to the officer, "But she is strong. Look at her muscles in her legs. She can work." The officer, indifferent, changed his nod, and the woman lived. The woman later again wrote, and it's in my book, wrote, "The brief incident was an incomprehensible act of grace." Okay. Or put more modestly, a good deed. I was saved by a young woman who was in as helpless a situation as the rest of us, and who nevertheless wanted nothing more than to help me. Total stranger. Incidents of that, I've got a couple of hundred in this book, okay? Incidents of that. For example, another survivor, Helen Sindick, she watched a young girl who worked in a slave labor camp kitchen every day risk her life to smuggle extra soup back to her sister, who then secretly shared it with a starving fellow prisoner. This violated strict death-threatening Nazi rule, but the sisters cared about the morality of each other along with the endangered health of others. So these examples repeat over and over again. Some of the examples are really exotic. The two I've given you are straight, okay? In the Shostak concentration camp, there were mass executions occurred, and barely alive victims laid on the grounds of the execution. Prisoners who were watching this, okay, created sugar and money packets and then went out and hid those sugar and money packets among the scattered bodies, along with instructions on how to escape the camp. And then went back to that barrack to sleep. And at night, the most alive of the wounded and left for dead would find the sugar and honey and make their effort to escape. Okay? That's a very far-reaching effort. And I cite it as an example of the A to Z range of what people would attempt to do for one another. Okay. Okay. Next slide, please. Here's a list of resources. There are thousands of books. These are ones that I'm particularly taken with and recommend especially to you. I'm going to invite my friend to speak in a few moments, but I want to begin to close by telling you of a gentleman that I met many survivors. This particular chap was in the French village that housed hundreds of Jews during the war at great risk to everybody in the village. Okay. By the way, he and others, the hidden, we estimate that it took 6 to 8 Gentiles to feed and care for every hidden Jew. So you should appreciate that when I talk about stealth altruism, I'm talking broadly about humanity's capability for it. Jews have a particular responsibility because we have been taught if you save one life, it is as if you have saved the world. And that's a particular Jewish precept, okay? You should understand that Yad Vashem, which is the Center for Holocaust Research in Israel, backed by the Knesset, paid for by the Israeli people, Yad Vashem has now identified, I think the figure is 38,000, and the figure grows by 500 or 600 every year, Gentiles who, with good evidence, because it takes a year or two to do the research, or good evidence, saved Jewish lives altruistically, no reward, just the feeling of doing what is right to do. Okay? They call righteous Jews among the nations, wonderful, wonderful people. Okay. The chap I want to quote from, who was helped by the righteous Jews, we don't have a slide on this one, so I will read this one to you. He says, if we remember solely the horror of the Holocaust, we will pass on no perspective from which meaningfully to confront and learn from that horror. I'm going to repeat it. If we remember solely the horror of the Holocaust, we will pass on no perspective from which meaningfully to confront and learn from that horror. If the hard and fast evidence of the possibility of good on earth is allowed to slip through our fingers and turn to dust, then future generations will have only dust to build on. If the hard and fast evidence of the possibility of good on earth is allowed to slip through our fingers and turn to dust, then future generations will have only dust to build on. Okay. I hope that after this quote sermon, close quote, which is what some of you will call it, okay, I hope that on May 5 and 6 of 2024, you will be different people, because on the evening of May 5 and on the day of May 6, you will be a standout in the audience of that year's Yom HaShoah. You will be a standout because if the speaker, as with almost all of the speakers I've ever heard on that day, treats only the horror story, however gently, however, reduced in its capacity to hurt, okay? You will maybe even stand up and say, wow, on the 17th of September, at a wonderful group convened by Howard, here in this community, I heard a different approach. I heard a both and approach. We have to study the horror so we don't repeat it. We have to salute the help so that we expand on it. Okay? I keep saying the last thing, I promise. This is my last thing, and then you're on, okay? The last thing is, do you have a single Holocaust-related memory that you treasure? Now, there's a contradiction in terms, right? Given the connotations of Holocaust. Here's mine, will surprise you. I've had the good fortune to do something which I'm now going to recommend all of you add to the top of your bucket list. Top. Okay, I've had the good fortune to stand on top of a overpass where cars and trucks go underneath. And on top of the overpass, you have a wide view of the highways. And some of you already know what I'm talking about. I was in Israel on Yom HaShoah some years ago. Because what happens at 10 a.m. on Yom HaShoah in Israel, year after year after year, since 1951. That's a long time, okay? For 3 minutes in the country of Israel, the sirens go. Now, some of you, as children, in schools and whatever, you've heard a siren. But have you heard a siren for 3 minutes? That's only half the story. Because when the siren is going, nothing else is happening except everybody is static. In meditation, everybody is thinking about the 6 million and the 5 million, the 11 million victims of Nazism. For 3 minutes, and this is what I meant by standing up where I had a view, buses have stopped, doors have opened, everybody's poured out of the bus. Cars have stopped, doors have opened, drivers are standing by their car. Try and imagine this. Can you imagine an American highway? I mean, sure, we have problems. We have problems. It's California, we have problems, but people standing there in deep meditation over the meanings that they associate with never forget, never forgive. Okay. We can redo our approach to the Holocaust. You in this audience have now heard enough from me on the subject. I have the privilege to present a local friend of mine who's doing things in this connection. Please.
Wow, that was tremendously moving. Okay, let's see if I can get this closer. Can we get it higher? Maybe that's it. Boy, I never thought I was tall before. First of all, Arthur, thank you so much. I've been someone who's been very influenced by your really emphasis on altruism and what it does for many years now. We're the same age, actually, and some of your, I mean, I feel it still from the blackouts in my building for air raids, even though I was in Montreal, not in Brooklyn. Anyhow, my hope here today is to inspire some of you to become helpers and to suggest some ways in which you can become a helper. And there are many ways that that can happen. The main things I'm going to focus on here are going into schools and telling stories to young children. There are two main groups that do that here in Sonoma County. There's the Alliance for the Study of the Holocaust and Genocide, and they have an education committee with speakers. There are, Todd, 25, 30? Right, you understand 2G and 3G, second generation and third generation. And they are the people that will be carrying the torch forward. So there's another group called the Holocaust Story Project, of which I'm a member and have been for many years now. And I'm the only survivor left in that group. My other friends and colleagues that were first generation survivors have passed away. So we're a dying group, and we're counting on second and third generation folks to carry forward into the future, not only the horrors, as Arthur has so eloquently talked about, but also the helper story, the positive, the good, the inspiring. The other hat that I would wear is that I am the co-chair of the Yom HaShoah commemoration, which will take place again this year, next year on May 5th. And it is a community-wide, secular, traditional, what have you, way of commemorating many aspects of and many facets that help us to remember, and hopefully inspire us. So I want to just give you a little sample because, you know, to become a speaker or a storyteller really can be a simple thing. It doesn't require you to have experience of being a teacher or a history professor. It's much more about exposing something from your own being of your family's history and story, whether you're a second or third generation person. So I want to just give you a tiny sample of what I do, just a small sample. I'll try and be brief. So once upon a time, a long, long time ago, there was a little boy called Pierino. And almost from the day he was born, he was afraid. And the strange thing is, he didn't know why he was afraid or what he was afraid of. But he could see the fear on his parents' faces. And that fear was contagious. Well, one day, Pierino visited his Oma, his grandmother. And he went to see her because on the day he was born, she was arrested and put in jail because she didn't obey one of the decrees of Hitler. She got out after a few months, but they took her passport, so she couldn't travel. And Pierino was living with his parents in Milano, who had already run from Berlin. So for his first birthday, he went to visit his grandmother in Berlin. This is shortly before Kristallnacht. And he stayed with her for 6 weeks or so. And she gave him a teddy bear. How many of you have had teddy bears? Dolls, objects, blankets, something that you held on to as a child. So I want to introduce you to Yehuda. Now, Yehuda has got plenty of battle scars here. And Yehuda and I go to the schools. You've probably gathered by now that Pierino is my story and my parents' story. And we go into the schools, and kids, of course, remember visuals and they remember stories. The history, yeah, some of it they get, and we talk about that too, for sure. So let's see. I'm trying to keep things short and crisp, and that's not so easy. A short time after Berlin, about a year later, we had to flee from Italy. And my parents managed miraculously to get a visa. I mean, it really was a miracle. And we were on the train from Milano. First stop was Paris. And the Nazis came onto that train. And my mother had hidden some gold coins. And the Nazis must have sensed something because they really thoroughly looked through all our belongings. And then they landed upon Yehuda. And they tore him out of my arms and cut him to pieces. looking for money or jewelry. So when I tell this story to the children, and I have about an hour in the classroom, and I try and relate the story of our family in such a way that it engenders empathy in these children. And we talk a lot about then empathy. And what I do is I make a transition to them and to their lives and how they can become ambassadors of goodness and acceptance of others. I ask them questions, and I use Yehuda as an instrument in accepting people who are different and scarred. And I feel extremely privileged to be able to do that. You know, it's not only a gift that helpers give others, it's a gift to ourselves. It provides, for me, meaning in my life, deep meaning, deep satisfaction. I'm going to set Yehuda down. By the way, Yehuda is a replica I found in England. Some of the children believe he's the real one, that because he's all cut up and beat up. He's the same year, the same make, and everything as the original. What else do I want to tell you? Yeah, I want to switch now to Yom HaShoah. So this year, the theme for Yom HaShoah is called Remember Us, Then and Now. And it really features the story of a worldwide organization that was founded here in Sonoma County by Gesher Kalmanson, a local wonderful teacher and former chair of the Yom HaShoah commemoration for many years. And what Remember Us does is, well, I want to read something to you, actually. I don't have a slide. So please bear with me for 2 or 3 minutes. I'm sorry to take up so much time. Some people believe it's best to forget the past. They bury their pain in some hidden recesses of their minds and hope it'll never be brought to mind again. Yet so many of our Jewish traditions ask us to remember, to honor, to hold dear in our hearts the people and the events of our history. So in Yom HaShoah 2024, we want to highlight an immensely successful organization called Remember Us, which provides a means for young adults to choose as their mitzvot, this is for their bar and bat mitzvahs, to adopt a child who was murdered during the Holocaust. These children research and get to know this peer so that they can tell their story. And the words that they speak ripple out from the bima towards their bat and bar mitzvahs. And in doing this, they move forward the clock from the past to the present. Through doing this, they teach history and inspire empathy among their peers and adults who are present. I won't go on any further, but I just want you to get that picture that there becomes a change within an individual when there's an experience of empathy and getting to know someone. And we all need to develop empathy, because it's through empathy that is the doorway to doing good deeds, to doing good in the world. And Arthur's message, I think, is very, very important, and it is underserved. So I invite you all to really consider looking at how can you help the Yoma Shoah Committee. We need people who stuff envelopes and put stamps on them. We need people who have computer skills. We need people who know music, who can make contributions and be on the committee. It means about an hour and a half for about 8 months every month on Zoom, mostly. We also accept donations because the synagogues charge us for various rooms, and we give speakers a stipend, etc. But we're all volunteers. So the Story Project of Sonoma County, the Alliance for the Study of the Holocaust, the Holocaust Commemoration Committee, we're all looking for you, and everyone is a volunteer. Thank you for your attention, and I'm sorry to have gone on.
I first have a question, which I wanted to ask at the end of Art's talk. Do you have any questions for Art? And then do you have any questions for Peter? If you have any questions, I only ask you to come up here and use the mic, because the portable mics, and I can't get them to work.
No. I lost over 100 relatives. She didn't, but what survived?
Well, maybe you want to repeat the question.
Okay, did my grandmother survive? No, she didn't survive. But what came out of her death and the circumstances was I did a trip for my 80th birthday, and I took 2 of my daughters with me, and we traced the steps of my grandmother. She was first sent to Łódź, the ghetto in Poland. I think it's pronounced Lodz in English. Anyway, and then to the Chełmno extermination camp where she was killed. For me to have my daughters and me connect over this was a gift that I can't tell you how beautiful it was for me. And for me to be able to also help them to see the good that was done and the good that they can do themselves in the world. It's always connected.
Any other questions? Yeah, please.
This is in response to Professor Shostak's presentation. I recently read by the historian Mark Mazauer. He said, to remember is to, how does it work? To remember is to restore the dignity of the victim and prove finally the falsity of their master's position. So my question specifically would be, I realize the professor has visited 40 or so Holocaust museums. have they all succeeded in this, or have they only partially succeeded relative to your research? And if you could inform us a bit on that aspect of your visits to museums.
Todd and I are colleagues. We are studying together. You were asking about the Holocaust museums. It saddens me to share with you that a typical display case in a Holocaust museum will show the knitting of a little hat or like a yarmulke in a display case, and next to it, a birthday card signed by many prisoners in a display case. Why does that sadden me? It saddens me because what the display case does not convey is that the yarn used in making the yarmulke and the paper and ink used in making a birthday card were stolen from the Third Reich. Everything in the camp belongs to the Third Reich. And therefore, the making of that yarmulke, the making of that card, was done at risk of severe punishment. And the people who made those knew it full well. But the nature of the good deed, what Darwin called the social impulse, overrode their pragmatic fear and had them go ahead. So here's my beef. Let the museum show the yarmulke, show the card, but for goodness sakes, put it in context. That just sits there, the yarmulke and the card, and people go, isn't that cute? Isn't it nice? It was more than that. It was heroic. It had multiple lessons: mutual care, defiance of the Nazis, resistance to be dehumanized, insistence on one's humanity. All of that, a yarmulke and a birthday card. Please. We're good. We have another question. Good.
Yeah, there's just another one.
It's not a question, but it's a comment, and I think it goes along with this. In the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, we came across a letter that was written from a Jewish girl to a neighbor friend. And the letter is there, of course, but the story goes on to say that she did close it up into an envelope, and all she could do was toss it on the ground as she moved toward the death camp. And some farmer picked it up and put it in the mail. And it got to the person that she was sending it to. So I think that speaks to what you're saying.
Very much so. Thank you for that. Thank you. There are numerous examples of this social impulse that Darwin saluted. Numerous. We are hardwired to care for one another. Hardwired to care for one another. You don't have to be taught it. I attended years and years ago here in California, a nursery school run by a drug rehab organization, and crawling out on the floor, I saw it through one-way glass, crawling out on the floor of a nursery school were all these diaper babies, pre-literate diaper babies, and they're crawling around on the floor. One of the more assertive of the babies grabbed a toy away from another. I turned to the adults with whom I was behind the glass and I said, do something. And the adult said, absolutely not. The adult said, watch and listen, because the crying volume in this nursery of crawling diaper babies suddenly rose higher and higher from the onlooking babies who were offended by the act of theft, by the thief. And the noise got louder and louder. And I said, do something, it was bothering my adult ears. And they said, calm down, it'll be over quickly. Okay. And sure enough, the thief, on hearing this volume of noise, crawled back across the place, gave the victim the toy, and the noise just dropped immediately. And I said to my friends, what have I just witnessed? And they said, you witnessed community. You witnessed mutual care. You witness sensitivity of any of us to the pain of others of us. You witness finding a harmless, well, bothered my ears, a harmless remedy which produced a desired restoration of a livable space. And I had to thank them. I started to exit a half hour later from this place, okay? And as I exited, a group of sub-teens, they must have been 8 or 9 or something, surrounded me. And they said, I was a professor at the time, whatever. They said, Professor, we've been watching you during your visit here. And I said, that's fine. It's been a great place. I loved it. They said, Professor, we want to hire you. I said, hire me? They said, yes, we're the children of this place. We're the children's guidance community. We help run this place. We look for new hires. You've passed our test. And so I had to have a discussion with them about what being a tenured professor back on the East Coast, all that. And they got sad, and they finally wound up forgiving me, excusing me. But in terms of a variety of salutes and awards and honors I've gotten over my life, that was singular, because children look into you. And children find out things about you that you may have even lost touch with. There's a great folk ballad that says that the children will teach us, Please, another question maybe. Can you come to the mic, please?
Hello, everyone. I'm Colette Levine, and I just wanted to talk for a moment about, I was born in 1942 while we were hiding in Belgium and Brussels. And I wanted to tell you about the righteous Christians, because that hasn't come up. My sister, who was 4 years older than I was, and who my mother had to take by foot from Germany to Belgium. She had to carry her. And my father was in a detention camp, which he was able to escape from. But the underground in Brussels was very strong. And my sister was put in a church, a convent. And she unfortunately got very ill and was running a high temperature, and the nuns were afraid she was going to die, and they were hiding a lot of Jewish children. So they had to get her out of there, and they found an older couple who didn't have any children, Christian couple, who were willing to take her in. And they took her for 4 years until the war was over, and raised her as though she was their own. And she was taught to say, If anybody asked, that this was my aunt and uncle, and my parents had died in the Belgian Congo. So that she was a baby too. She was only 4 or 5 years old. And children had to learn how to say these things to protect themselves. They knew what was going on, and it was amazing. And you saw it in Schindler's List, that the little children knew that they had to hide, and they knew what they had to do. But I was, we were very lucky. Our neighbors knew we were hiding there. They knew Jews were hiding there. Nobody turned us in, unlike Anne Frank. But it was a similar story, but we survived, and we were able to, after the war in 1948, come to the United States. But you have to remember all of the righteous Christians that took children in, hid families. I mean, there's a documentary that I would advise that you see, and it's called The Jews in the Garden. And it takes place in Poland. And it's a very interesting story about how the Poles, the resistance fighters and the Poles, were also killing Jews. But there were many righteous Christians who, and we mustn't forget that, who saved Jews at the risk of their own lives.
The recommendation of the documentary reminds me, on my closing slide, I gave you only books. Permit me to, yes, books, wonderful books. Permit me to recommend 2 films, neither of which I think you'll be familiar with. Okay, one is called My Mother's Courage. My Mother's Courage. A great Hungarian filmmaker had a remarkable mother, and she winds up standing up to a Nazi commandant after they've all been gathered up and impressing the commandant with her integrity. The commandant agrees to allow her to return with him to the city from which they've all been taken. She insists on rescuing a young girl as well, or she won't go. And the commandant takes these 2 females into his own compartment. And in the compartment, they exchange their stories. The commandant's story, the woman's story, the girl's story. This is not for children, this film, My Mother's Courage, but it is for full-grown adults, okay? The second film is called 1945. Most extraordinary film, has only 2 Jewish characters. Everybody else in the film is from I believe, the Hungarian countryside, and they all occupy a little Hungarian village, which once had Jews. But the villagers turned the Jews over to the Nazis, and they now occupy all the Jewish homes and all the Jewish porcelain and all the Jewish furniture. And a train pulls in one day, and an old man and what could be his adult son come out of the train, and they have a large box which gets put on a wagon, and the villagers are terrified because this means the Jews are coming back. The Jews are going to claim all of this. But that's not what it's about. And that's not what the box contains. It's an extraordinary film, 1945. The war has just ended. There are many, many, many good Holocaust films, but those will show you the way to the others. Thank you.
Any other questions, any other statements, any other thoughts that people want to say? In any case, I want to thank all of you for coming. It's been ran a little bit longer than I expected. And I don't know if I have Do you want
Can
to
I
say
say
something
one-
else, Peter?
one quick
Yes.
thing? There's a little a sign-up sheet in the back for any participation or even interest. If you want to hear more about opportunities to be a helper, please let me know. If you want to send money, do that as well.
Well, thank you. I think I've got another slide. I know. What I thought I would tell you about, I think on the, is what is a program for next month. It's on Jewish American identity, and it's really about the newly presented ethics studies curriculum for the state of California. And we'll have someone, an educator, coming here and talking about how Judaism fits into that program or doesn't fit in, depending upon your view. Anyhow, I encourage all of you to come here for that program next month. And let me just say again, Shana Tova, and we're. What's interesting